Reflections on the Meaning of Life by Steve Pavlin, Part 1. What is a sense of life? Why are we here? Does God exist or does not exist, and if he does, what is his nature? Which religion is the most correct of all world religions? Is there life after death? Are we mostly physical creatures or spiritual ones? Humans have struggled for thousands of years to find answers to these questions. Because of them, wars were fought. But despite the fact that because of these questions people lost their heads, both figuratively and literally, in the end we have to admit that these questions are very practical, behind the wheel. The answers to these questions completely determine the environment or context for everything else we do with our lives. If we give our life any value, then we must take the time to consider these issues. Suppose your life is organized around goals, projects, and activities. You set a goal, for example, start a new business on the internet. You break it down into projects like writing a business plan and launching your website. And then you break those projects down into smaller steps. Go to the bank and open an account, register a domain name. Logically enough. But first of all, why start a business? What's the point of this? Why do you choose this goal and not any other? Why set goals at all? It is your context that determines the goals you set, or don't set. Your context is your collection of beliefs and values. So, if the value of money and freedom is part of your context, you might lean towards the idea of starting your own business. But with a different set of values, a different context, you may not want to set any goals at all. The most significant part of your context is the collection of beliefs about the nature of reality, which includes religious, spiritual, and philosophical beliefs. Your beliefs about the universe as a whole will largely determine your results. Context dictates goals. Goals dictate projects. Projects dictate actions. Actions dictate results. When you are in a certain context, you will almost never be able to achieve certain results, because you will never set the goals necessary to achieve these results. Your context works like a filter. When you are inside one particular context, you lose access to potential goals, projects, and activities that lie outside it. For example, if your context includes the belief that crime is very bad, then you most likely will not aspire to become the leader of an organized crime group in the future. Sit in my seat. This is a long personal story, but I think it will interest you. If you take the time to read it, I want you to pay attention to how my beliefs, my context, shifted over time and how radically they affected my results. For half my life I have been chasing the context that would give me the best life possible. Of course, this is a strange race, since it involves searching for context, while at the same time constantly being inside one of them. In other words, the concept of the best possible life is also part of any context, so I have to look for a context that would define this concept and provide the means for its implementation. This race started almost by accident for me, but over time I started consciously chasing. Nimbus. For the first half of my life, until the age of 17, I was a Catholic Christian, baptized and convinced. I went through 8 years of general church school and then 4 years of Catholic high school. I was a Boy Scout for several years and earned the Ad Alter Dei award. I prayed daily and took for granted everything that I was taught. Every Sunday our family went to church. All my friends and relatives were Christians, so I didn't know anything about other belief systems. My father was an altar boy in his youth, and his brother, my uncle, is a Catholic priest. One of my cousins is a member of the Camp Crusade for Christ. In high school, I occasionally visited religious almshouses and worked in communities, hospitals, and kindergartens for handicapped children. I thought I would be a Catholic all my life. Unholy rumors. By the end of my first year of high school, I went through an ordeal that I would describe as awakening. It was as if a new part of my brain suddenly turned on, pushing me to a higher level of consciousness. Perhaps it was just a side effect of the growing up process. I began to openly question the beliefs that had been instilled in me since childhood. Blindly accepting what I was taught no longer suited me. I wanted to look behind the scenes, eradicate all contradictions, and generally understand whether my beliefs made sense. I started asking a lot of questions, but found that very few people were willing to honestly discuss them. Most people simply stopped paying attention to me or took up a deaf defense. But I was not hostile to them, just very curious. It was not customary in my family to discuss all this, but I found several sympathetic teachers. My high school, Loyola High in Los Angeles, was a Jesuit school, and for priests, the Jesuits were very liberal people. I started my senior year at a Catholic school as a 17-year-old atheist. Irony, yes. At the beginning I didn't know what to expect, but I soon discovered that the context of atheism gave me tremendous strength. By throwing off all my old beliefs, I seemed to have upgraded, or renewed, my brain. I could think much clearer and my brain worked much harder. I also felt much more in control of my own life than ever before. Without faith in God, I took full responsibility for my life outcomes. Studying at school was easier than ever for me, despite the fact that I attended the most difficult classes. I was so good at differential calculus that the teacher gave me a special exam, different from the tasks for the rest. And once my physics teacher came to me in front of the school and asked me to show him how to solve a difficult problem in physics. Mathematics and science came so easily to me that I began to look for new ways to test myself. I've tried doing all my homework on a tiny piece of paper, writing it on the back of a bag of chips with crayons, coloring polar graphs with crayons and turning them into art. People thought I was a little nuts, but I mostly did it to keep my interest in the subject, since the tasks themselves were not the slightest difficulty for me. You don't know anything in life if you haven't had to take the integral with colored crayons, slightly smiling face. I didn't hide the fact that I was an atheist, so in religion classes I spewed out the undigested information necessary for an excellent grade, but when there were open discussions of issues, I approached them from an atheistic perspective. I am grateful to the Jesuits for being so liberal and tolerating my behavior. For that, I have a lot of confidence in them. My family didn't like it, especially when issues of the American Atheist began to appear in the mailbox. Usually I was able to intercept the mail earlier. But my school was doing so well that they had nothing to complain about, and they did not want to openly discuss my issues, even though I would be happy to do so. However, they continued to force me to go to church, and I tolerated this for a while, because I knew that within a year I would leave anyway. Eventually I began to sit in another part of the church, which gave me the opportunity to slip out into the street, take a walk and come back before the end. But one day Mass ended earlier than usual, and I returned too late. My family was already in the car and saw me walking down the street. Oh. They left without me. But instead of walking the 2 miles home, I walked all day and returned after midnight. With the exception of weddings and funerals, that was the last time I went to church. Despite these conflicts, my last year at school was without a doubt my best year. I graduated with honors in all subjects and was accepted into 6 computer science colleges: California Institute of Technology, University of California at Los Angeles, with a partial scholarship, University of California at San Diego, with a full scholarship, University of California at Berkeley, Carnegie Mellon University and Harvey Mudd Claremont College. I chose the University of California at Berkeley because at the time their computer science program was the highest ranked in the country. I was very happy to go there and finally become my own master. In the fall of 1989, I moved to Berkeley and moved into a freshman dorm. Then strange things began to happen. Judas. At Berkeley, my atheistic context was further developed. I was no longer surrounded by Catholics, and I met a lot of interesting people with a wide variety of belief systems. I quickly made new friends who were very intelligent people, some of whom were willing to enjoy discussing the nature of reality. I think my Catholic upbringing was like a compressed spring. As soon as I left the environment that kept the spring compressed, I immediately flew to the other end of the spectrum. But I've gone too far with this. I not only threw away my old religious beliefs, my whole concept of morality flew with them. I was like the guy in Mark Twain's Facts about the recent Connecticut crime carnival, which is about a man who killed his conscience. I got into things that were the exact opposite of my upbringing. I completely lost interest in my studies and very rarely showed up for class. I didn't care about grades. Almost every week I went to parties and got drunk there. I once drank 14 times in a row and in the morning had absolutely no memory of how I got to bed. I had to ask my friends about what happened last night. I am quite sure that I drank more alcohol before I was 21 than after, and now I am 34. I also often began stealing from open shelves in stores or taking goods out unpaid, for example underclothes. The first time I did it was just like a thing that I had never done before and could never do as a Catholic. It was like a task that needs to be done, for show. But I soon got hooked on the emotional surge of adrenaline that accompanied these acts, and began to do it more and more often, eventually reaching several times a day. I almost never steal things for myself. I gave most of what I stole to other people, or just threw it in the trash later. Around the end of the first month of the first semester, I got arrested. Probationary period 4 months. I slowed down for a week and returned to my work, although I became more careful. A week after my probation ended, I was arrested again, which resulted in 40 hours of community service. I got the job done and soon started stealing again. But I have greatly improved my methods, and it has become much more difficult to catch me. Several times I was on the verge of failure, but this only gave me more confidence. I was so used to this behavior that I could steal with an unwavering heart. There was no fear. So I had to increase the dose. In the beginning, I set small goals, such as how many large chocolates I could stuff into my pocket at a time, 13, or steal all the bottles of white from the student store in one day, more than 50 bottles. Then I just handed out chocolates and wine to fellow students. I did not study well and was also placed on probation at the university. They do this when you don't show up for class. Although I can't say that I was very worried then. But things went from bad to worse when I met a student who was just as depraved as me, and we quickly became friends. I stopped risky shoplifting, and together we planned and executed a 2-person heist in which there was very little chance of getting caught. The scheme worked time after time, and we both began to receive small but real money. For safety reasons and to avoid repetition in the same place, we have expanded our range of operations well beyond Berkeley, almost 100 miles from San Francisco to Sacramento and Fresno. Over the course of the year, we gradually brought the monetary value of each theft to a value that fully falls under the definition of large theft. At that time, any theft over $400. I think our record in terms of money was $2,400 over the weekend. Shouldn't have done this. I ended up getting caught again, this time for grand larceny. Badly. Before my arrest, I discovered that because of my previous misdeeds, if charged with grand theft, I would face 2 years in prison. Very bad. And to make matters worse, I was arrested in Sacramento, 2 hours from Berkeley. But my partner couldn't wait, hang around and shine himself, so he drove back. I'm stuck in the county jail for an identity check. I never stole with documents and immediately gave the police one of my many false names, but of course they did not believe me and I had to sit in a cell while they found out who I was by fingerprints. So I was there, 19 years old, in jail on the very Saturday that the 1991 US Cup Final was played. And in anticipation that I will lose my freedom for 2 years. Baba! Reality crashed down on me like that. For the first few hours I was in shock, unable to think coherently. Maybe it's because of the orange color. But since there was nothing to do, just sit and think for an indefinite time, I again began to ask all these global questions. What the hell am I doing here? Is it really me? But now my answers were very different. I realized that this context was completely wrong. I resigned myself to spending the next 2 years in prison, but I also knew that I was forever changed and that this lifestyle was over. 2 years in prison. That will be a painful lesson. But at least I learned it. I didn't have the full replacement context yet, but I started planting the seed for it. That seed was the understanding that no matter how bad things seemed now, things could get better in the future. I knew I would eventually recover and be back to normal. It may take a few years to get back on my feet, but I was sure that I could survive it. At the time, I wouldn't have called him that, but that was the moment when the idea of personal growth settled in me. It was the thought that no matter how bad things are right now, I still have the ability to outgrow the trouble and be in a better position in the future. That thought was all I had, but it was enough to let me endure. 3 days later I was released. They were able to identify me. I was given a court date and released, charged with a felony of grand larceny. Sunset was coming soon. First, I walked around the Capitol building and garden in Sacramento, just enjoying the fresh air. I was happy that I had a few more months of freedom. It's very boring in a cell, and I was only in a county prison, not a federal one. Unfortunately, I had a more pressing issue on my agenda. I had no papers, only $18 in cash and had to drive 120 miles to get home. I was lucky, I was able to catch the last bus to Oakland for only $16 and from there my former partner drove me home. Returning to my apartment, I found a letter from the university in the mailbox announcing that I had been expelled. They do this when your GPA starts with a decimal point. Reflections on the Meaning of Life by Steve Pavlin Part 2.